So, Afcon's a bit strange. Let's have a conversation about it. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night. My name is Letij and you're watching FOOTNOW. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about why is there so many Afcon upsets this year. So for anyone that's been watching Afcon this year, you've probably been able to see that there's been a ton of upsets in the tournament this season. Algeria, Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon, Egypt, these teams have fallen to teams like Mozambique, Namibia, Cape Verde, the list goes on. Even just yesterday, we saw an incredible day as Egypt fell to Cape Verde, and the same can be said with Ghana and Mozambique. While we're pretty privy to an Afcon upset this year, it's just felt like a lot of the big teams have been falling short of the wayside. Today, we're going to be taking a look into the tactical setups of these small teams and how these new international coaches are being able to upset the bigger teams. Now, when you look at Mozambique's attacking setup against Egypt in the first half, they did go for a more possession-dominant style of play. They did have 43% of possession, but Egypt were making too many chances in the final third. To try and contain Egypt's attacks going through the middle, Mozambique coach Chiquinho Conde brought on two very pivotal players in the second half. Bruno Langa of Chaves in the Portuguese Premier League, who normally operates as a left back but was used as a very wide wing back in the game, was brought on, and Clesio Bauk, who normally operates as a winger, was brought on for Gildo, who was being used as a pure winger in the first half. More men in the middle of the midfield in the second half also meant that Mozambique had a bit more of a chaotic style of play, but this did help their transitions. This is what led to their second goal and ultimately put the sword to Egypt. Mozambique gaffer Conde has shown that in international tournaments you don't always need the most firepower. If you've got a good tactical setup and you can win the ball in transitional plays, you can always take the game to those bigger teams. Now in this game, Colin Benjamin's team lined up in a 4-1-4-1 formation. However, in build-up play it looked more like a 2-4-1-3, with those two centre-backs lying deep, allowing the wing-backs to go forward. By trusting their two centre-backs defensively to win their one-on-one duels and then clogging up the midfield in the middle of the pitch, it meant that Tunisia had to focus their attacks down the wide areas of the pitch. This meant that 5 of the 7 shots they had were all headers inside the box, and they only had an XG of 0.69. Namibia knew what they were doing. This proactive approach to defending with the low blocks and narrow formations can also be seen with other smaller teams in the tournament. In game week 1, Guinea were able to hold Cameroon to an XG of only 0.7 and Angola were able to hold Algeria to an XG of only 0.86. On the other side of the coin, Cape Verde have just been taking the games to their teams, for example Ghana and Egypt, where they've scored 4 goals in those 2 games. On the other side, Equatorial Guinea have probably been a bit lucky to hold Nigeria to only 1 goal, with Nigeria having an XG of over 3.5. It goes to show that a lot of these smaller African teams have noticed that if they're able to play well tactically, then they'll be able to get a result from the bigger teams. When you watch the games in Afcon, it sometimes seems like the tactical formations are a bit more chaotic. However, when you really go into the crux of the situations, these smaller teams know what they're doing tactically. Now, I think the next thing to talk about when it comes to Afcon is the fatigue. With it being a mid-season tournament, a lot of these gaffers want their players to be as sharp as possible, knowing that they've already played club football this season. However, with players racking up more and more minutes each season, is there such thing as being too sharp for these tournaments? Obviously not. There is no such thing as being too sharp. I think what I meant by that is the players are probably getting a bit tired. So I've got a fascinating statistic for you guys. Now, I went to look at each of the 11s for all of the bigger teams in Afcon and then compared it to some of the smaller teams in Afcon. And this is what I found. So looking at the bigger teams with a high percentage of players playing in the top leagues, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Nigeria, and Algeria, these 11s have a total combined games of 661 between them. That's 165 games per team and an average of 15 games per season per player in these teams. Now, I know what you're thinking, doesn't seem too crazy, but let's look at the other side. Now, in comparison, Equatorial Guinea, Cape Verde, Angola, and Namibia have a combined total of 427 games per 11 in these teams. That's an average of 106 games per 11 and only 9 games per player. It's a massive, massive, massive gap, and as you can see with your own eyes, these teams kind of look a bit more fresh than the bigger teams in the tournament. Now, when it comes to tournament football, this could be a pivotal stat. When it comes to injuries and fatigue, a lot of the bigger teams might start to feel this as they get to the latter stages of the tournament, if they even get there, whilst a lot of the smaller teams have probably got a lot more energy in the tank. I mean, you've looked at players like Mo Salah, who's already gotten injured. He's played something stupid like 25 games this season for Liverpool, then going to Afcon, and then having to go back into a really high-pressure Premier League situation. I just don't know how much energy these big players have got left. With a lot of these nations expecting trophies when it comes to international tournaments, there is a lot of pressure on players like Riyad Mahrez, Mohamed Salah, Victor Osimhen and others to really bring it home for their countries. Now, this is something that can be a bit too much for some players, especially when they have to go from club football to international football and the pressure just shifts from one shirt to another. Although these elite players are used to this high level pressure for their clubs, when it comes to Afcon it just hits a bit differently. When it's your nation, you're always going to feel a bit more on edge. This can be seen with the smaller teams as they've got a lack of pressure on them. They're able to play a bit more free, they're able to play with a lot more joy. Now, when you come up against a lower team and they've got this sense of freedom, it's always going to be difficult when you've got all this pressure on you. Afcon is a strange competition. We never know what's going to happen and we never know what big teams are going to fall out early. As we can see from game week 3, this is evident. I hope to those watching the competition that you enjoy it, and I hope to those who are watching the competition for their countries that you can bring it home this year. My name's been the TJ, this is FOOTNOW, cheers.